Okay, so moving on, we got another Supreme Court case coming up. But before we do that, we need an index card. So go ahead and grab an index card, and we have card 3.12, prior restraint. Prior restraint. So go ahead and write that down. I want you to take a picture of this too and upload that to Google Classroom as well, just so make sure I know you got in. That'd be great. All right, so prior means like before something happens, and then restraint means like restraining someone from doing something. All right, so you're restraining someone from doing something before something happens. Okay, so that just keep that in mind. So if you see the word prior restraint, just think about what it means, and it kind of makes sense. All right, so what does prior restraint have to do with? Well, first off, it is backside. It is the suppression or censorship, if you will, of material that would be published or broadcast. And it's the government that's doing the suppression. So it's some sort of censorship of material that would be published or broadcast on the grounds that it's harmful to government security. On the grounds that it's harmful to government security. So, for example, let's say America was going to be in a wartime situation and the media got a hold of the plans of when we were going to attack. And if they published when we would attack, that could allow the enemy to attack our men and women in the military, and they could be hurt. They could be killed. So the government, on grounds that this hurts government security, they would suppress or censor the publishment of this material. So that's prior restraint. Before it gets published, you're restraining that government, the press or the media from actually publishing it. All right, so why is that important? Because it plays right into our next case, which is Unit 3, case New York Times versus United States, and it is in 1971. New York Times versus US, 1971. Make sure you either have your document open in Cami so you can type, or you've got the paper copy that you're copying on, which is my preferred method, and you're go ahead and writing that down. All right, so at any time, as always, pause so that way you can actually write notes if you need to. All right, so first off, what's the issue? The press publishing classified government material. If something is classified, it means that it's secret. Like the government doesn't want everyone knowing it. There's something secret about it. This is particularly true if it has to do with things regarding the military. And so in this case, the New York Times gets a hold of something that is classified and they want to print it. The key clause is the freedom of the press, First Amendment. Freedom of the press, First Amendment. Pause if you need to, because I'm moving on. All right, facts of the case. So what happened? Well, this has to do with Richard Nixon. It was 1971. And actually, prior to 1971, the Nixon administration creates a classified study called the Pentagon Papers, a classified study called the Pentagon Papers about what went wrong in Vietnam. So these papers detail what went wrong in Vietnam. New York Times gets a hold of the Pentagon Papers. The New York Times gets a hold of the papers and they want to print them. But Nixon finds out and he claims prior restraint to stop publishment. He says that it's national security, that like the New York Times should not be publishing something about military in Vietnam because it could hurt our national security. So he stops the publishment of these papers, the Pentagon Papers. The New York Times sues, says it's a violation of the freedom of the press, and it goes to the Supreme Court. That's the facts of the case. Make sure you know that. Nixon has the Pentagon Papers. New York Times gets them. They want to print them. Nixon claims prior restraint, meaning he's going to stop publishment. He's going to censor it. And New York Times sues violation of freedom of press. Key question. Is Nixon's efforts to stop publication of classified information violate the First Amendment? Now, by the way, in this case, does it violate the First Amendment. There are other cases where the government may stop publication of something and it's not a violation of the First Amendment. But in this case, what Nixon tried to do to stop the Pentagon Papers from being printed is that a violation of the First Amendment. And the New York Times wins 6-3. New York Times wins 6-3. Ruling and decision. So the government did not overcome, and this is like where we get into some crazy vocabulary here. So you're just going to have to work with me and remember this. The government did not overcome heavy presumption against prior restraint. Get that down. Government did not overcome heavy presumption against prior restraint. What does that mean? Heavy presumption against. It means that like we favor free speech. We favor the right to freedom of press. Like that should be what happens most of the time. So there's a presumption, meaning like a decision against it. Like we're going to presume that they get to publish it. So there's a heavy presumption against censorship. But the government needs to make an argument to censor in this case. So, and they're saying that the government didn't overcome it. Like they needed to make an argument that it should be censored, and they just didn't do it. It wasn't good enough. Like their argument for the Pentagon Papers to not be published was not good. They argued that there was no immediate harm to U.S. troops because this was more of like a history of what went wrong in Vietnam. And so like there was no real immediate harm to U.S. troops. So prior restraint was unjustified. So since there was no immediate harm to U.S. troops, prior restraint is unjustified. All right. Oh, sorry, I got that. All right, pause if you need to. Last thing is the dissent. There were 3 people that dissented, 3 justices who dissented, and their main argument really centered around this. They just said this decision was rushed, and they hurried it through the court system, and no attention to impact on national security and executive rights were given. So basically, they didn't necessarily disagree with the decision on its merits. They were like, well, I mean, you guys could be right. Maybe prior restraint wasn't good. But they also said, though, that like, but this was rushed. Like, you guys rushed this thing through so quickly in order for the New York Times to publish this that, like, you didn't really stop and think about national security and the precedent this might set or the rights of the executive branch to keep things secret. And this could be a bad precedent for the future. At least that was the argument of the people who dissented. But they lost, hence why they were a dissent. All right, awesome. Go ahead and make sure you got that and study it.